So Apple has announced their second generation silicon, the M2 system on a chip, and along with it, two new laptops that will be sporting the M2. The MacBook Air 13-inch and the 13-inch MacBook Pro. And I've got to say up front that this is one of the strangest product releases I've seen come out of Cupertino in many, many years. There's definitely some gotchas in this lineup, so I encourage you to watch this video to the end because I want to point out some things that I recommend you avoid, including one of these laptops altogether, and some things that I think will be wise if you decide to make a purchase here in your configuration. Now, there's a lot to like about the new M2. If you haven't seen my initial review of that, you'll find the link at the end of this video. It offers 25% more transistors than the M1, 20 billion to be exact, 50% increase in memory bandwidth over the M1 to 100 gigabytes per second, and that is incredible. You can configure it with up to 24 gigabytes of unified memory, and I want to talk about that here in just a bit. They've made some improvements to the 8-core CPU. It still has 4 high-performance cores and 4 high-efficiency cores, but some improvements have been made, such as increasing the cache. This results in 18% better performance from the M2 versus the M1, so that's a significant upgrade. It can be configured with up to 10 GPU cores, that's 2 more than the M1, but I have some thoughts on this as well. All told, the graphics performance can be 25 to 35% better than the M1, so in terms of graphic processing, this thing's a real beast. In terms of the M2 Air, there's a lot to like about this laptop. It's got a design refresh that mimics the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, which I absolutely love. A square look, sharper edges, and some considerable upgrades. It only weighs 2.7 pounds. It's 11.3 millimeters or less than half an inch thick. It's slightly deeper to accommodate the much appreciated new function row with physical buttons. The display does contain the controversial notch, but from my experience using the 14-inch M1 MacBook Pro, it doesn't take long to adapt to it. It features Touch ID, an awesome keyboard with backlighting. It comes in 4 colors: silver, space gray, starlight, and midnight. Kind of a cross between a deep dark blue and a black depending on the lighting. It features a larger display based on a thinner bezel, which is 25% brighter than the previous generation at 500 nits. It has an improved 1080 webcam. It offers quad speakers that closely resemble those in the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, which are phenomenal, although we have yet to hear those. It offers a triple mic array with beamforming audio, high impedance headphone jack. The much beloved MagSafe charging port is back to the praise and applaud of many of us. The power cable comes color matched to your choice of the 4 colors. It offers fast charging with up to 67 watt adapter that can charge the laptop to 50% in only 30 minutes. They also offer a dual USB-C 35 watt adapter. It has no fan for silent operations. It has a slightly larger battery capacity that allows this new laptop, despite all of these performance enhancements, to still provide 18 hours of video playback. So we applaud Apple for providing that nice balance between performance, cooling, and battery life. Now for what I don't like about the M2 MacBook Air. First of all is the price. The M1 Air started at $999, but the base price on the M2 Air has gone up to $1199, a $200 increase. And Apple is keeping the M1 Air in its lineup still at $999. So this is a bit unusual for Apple. Typically what they would do in this situation is they would release the M2 Air at the same price as the previous generation, and if they were going to keep the older product in their lineup, they would reduce the price, say to $899 or such. So this points at something unusual going on within the Cupertino ecosystem, and I think it points to primarily a supply chain shortage and an increase in manufacturing costs due to the global pandemic. I'm also a bit disappointed with the display on the M2 Air. It does use an LED display and it offers 500 nits of brightness, and so that's great. But as someone who's gotten used to that new mini LED on the 14 and 16 inch MacBook Pro, that display is phenomenal. Clearly the best display you'll find on any laptop anywhere. And once I've gotten used to that, it's difficult to go back to a lesser display, and that's certainly what is happening here with the Air. Now, granted, we're talking about the Air that's more of a mass consumer device versus the MacBook Pro, which is clearly designed for professionals. But I think that display will need to factor into some decision making here. Had Apple put that mini LED display in the M2 Air, I would have no qualms about the price going up $200 because that display would have been well worth that investment. Now, I talked about the lack of a cooling fan in the positive column in terms of noise management, but there's also a negative that comes with that, which is you're going to be capping the performance of this machine in its ability to handle heavy sustained workloads. So there's a trade-off in terms of no fan for quiet operations, but it's also going to be capping the performance of this machine. More on that in my recommendations here in just a sec. So first, who should not buy the M2 Air? It's interesting that the M2 Air starts at a base price of $1199, but if you fully max out all the features, it goes up to $2499. So if you're the kind of user that would want to max this thing out with all of the features and capabilities to $2,500, I don't think you should be buying this laptop. For $2,500, you can get a lot more bang for your buck by moving to the 14 or 16 inch MacBook Pro, the M1, the M1 Pro, or the M1 Max. You get so much more capability out of that machine that if you're remotely considering spending $2,500 on an M2 Air, I think that money would be better spent over with the M1 14 inch or 16 inch. Now, if you're ready to make a purchase right now, the M1 Pro and M1 Max are still phenomenal chips. I would have no reservations making that recommendation. But if you're not ready to pull the trigger right now, we can expect to see an M2 Pro and an M2 Max come out later this year that will be replacing or coming alongside as an upgrade for those 14 and 16 inch MacBook Pros. Second of all, if you are a power user, you may be tempted to buy the M2 Air and max it out, but power users will probably want to push the boundaries of that machine past its ability. The lack of a cooling fan is going to significantly limit its ability to handle sustained workload. So if you're doing music production, video production, graphic design, animation, playing games, anything that's really going to be pushing the boundaries of the CPU and GPU, having a cooling fan can really make a difference, because what's going to happen without that cooling fan is the thermal limit is going to be reached by that machine. And once that happens, the system, in order to preserve the integrity of all those components, is going to have to lower the performance down in order to dissipate that heat. I also don't recommend this laptop for anyone doing serious graphic design, photography, videography, cinematography. The display on the 14 and 16 inch MacBook Pro is so superior to this one that I just wouldn't want to recommend this to someone with a visual focus. The upgrade to that MacBook Pro, the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, is a great machine for anyone focused on graphic design, photography, videography, and such. So who should buy the M2 Air? I think there are two primary audiences that will be the perfect fit for this laptop. First of all, if you already own a MacBook Air and you're still on the Intel platform, you're wanting to revise to get more performance, battery life, capability, then this is the perfect laptop for you. If you missed the M1 boat, you're still running on Intel, you've already gotten used to the Air ecosystem, you're familiar with it, you like it, then this will be an amazing upgrade for you. It offers so much more than Intel-based users are accustomed to in performance, battery life, all around capability. It's going to be so much snappier and able to handle some heavier workloads than you're accustomed to on an Intel-based Air. Second, anyone who's looking for a sleek, savvy, everyday carry laptop, this is a great choice. If you're a business traveler or you're a writer and you primarily want to sit in Starbucks and write your great novel, then this is an amazing machine that's going to deliver for you, not only for those low-end needs such as word processing and browsing and whatnot, but also the ability to ramp up and handle heavy workloads for short durations of time. Then this offers a great combination of features. Now, if you are thinking about buying the M2 Air, I have some configuration recommendations for you. First of all, related to memory, although the M2 can support up to 24 gigabytes of unified memory, I don't recommend anyone, or at least virtually anyone I could think of, needing to upgrade a fanless M2 Air to 24 gigabytes of memory. It's probably going to be a big waste of money. Even 16 gigabytes will probably not be needed for the vast majority of users. If you're buying this to watch video, to do word processing, browsing, social media, and that type of thing, the default 8 gigabytes of memory will be just fine. If you are a multitasker where you're running a wide variety of apps at the same time, maybe there's a case for upgrading to 16 gigabytes. But for most users, the default 8 gigabytes will be just fine. Second of all, I would not recommend upgrading the M2 Air to the 10-core GPU. Because it doesn't have a fan, whenever this machine gets taxed, it reaches its thermal limit, it's going to have to cut back on the processing capabilities, and if you've got 10 GPU cores, it's probably going to be throttling those back anyway, so I think that would be a waste of money for this particular machine. Now, granted, if you're talking about a future release of the MacBook Pro, now that's a very different story. And finally, I recommend you purchase the largest SSD drive you can possibly afford. Since that thing cannot be upgraded, you're going to be maxed out once you make that purchase. You cannot upgrade it. Your needs will likely grow in the future, and so you will be servicing your future self a big favor by biting the bullet and buying the largest one you can. When I bought the 14-inch MacBook Pro, the M1 Pro, I bit the bullet and I bought a 4 terabyte drive, and I'm so thankful that I did. I tended to fill up a 2 terabyte drive on my previous laptop frequently, so having that extra space makes so much difference, especially for someone like me that creates a lot of content. That is a worthwhile investment. Buy as much as you possibly can. And now on to the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro. And I've got to say, this is one of the strangest product releases I've seen come out of Cupertino possibly ever. I'm still shaking my head over this one. Apple is taking its very latest chip, the M2 second generation ARM-based system on a chip, and putting it in their oldest chassis, the old MacBook Pro that hasn't been updated in many years. It feels like this Frankenstein beast comprised of these mismatched pieces and parts that, in my opinion, I don't think anyone should buy. I would stay clear from that thing at all costs. The resale value on that is going to be terrible, in my opinion. The only way that this product makes any sense at all is put within the context, once again, of the supply chain shortage. I think what happened here is that Apple wanted to put this in a brand new chassis to match the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, but they simply could not get their hands on enough inventory. And so they were forced to make a decision either to not release a MacBook Pro with the M2 on this initial release, or they were going to have to dig into an existing abundance of old chassis and simply drop that new chip into an overabundance likely of those old chassis. So this was one of those difficult decisions that evidently Apple made, and I would be really surprised to see if this thing makes hardly any sales at all, because I simply can't imagine anyone wanting the latest chip and the oldest chassis and finding that to be a harmonious hybrid of combinations. The M2 MacBook Pro does have a fan for better cooling and a larger battery, but other than that, it is inferior in practically every other way to the MacBook Air. And so why would you choose the old chassis over the new chassis of the M2 Air? The choice here is really obvious. As a matter of fact, the only people that I could think that would possibly consider buying this is people that like the old touch bar. They don't like the function row with physical keys. They like that old design of that touch bar, and so they want an upgraded CPU. Then yeah, maybe those half dozen people exist on the planet, but I've got to think that the other 99.9999% of users in the world are going to be much better served with the M2 Air than that Frankensteinian beast of the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro. Well, there you have it. Those are my thoughts on Apple's new M2 MacBook Air and 13-inch MacBook Pro. I hope you found this to be helpful, insightful. If it has, do me a big favor and click the like button. That makes a huge difference in my channel. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions or thoughts, please leave those in the comments section below. I will interact with each and every one of those. I appreciate it. Hey, until next time, remember, spread the love.